You're listening to Alamo City Limits podcast with Noah Magaro-George, the official San Antonio Spurs podcast of Pounding the Rock in SB Nation.
What's going on, Spurs fans? It's the day after the draft, and we're back for another episode of Alamo City Limits. I've got another very special guest today. I got my boy, Damien Bartonek here from Air Alamo. What's going on, Dame? How you doing, man?
What's going on, Noah? I'm very, very glad to be here, man. Very, very excited to talk about the NBA draft. The Spurs didn't do anything exciting, so it's going to be a very, quick episode. You know what I mean? Nothing special went down yesterday.
Yeah, there was no drama. There were no surprise picks. Everybody thought Josh Primo was going 12, so no surprises. but for real, let's go ahead and talk about that pick, because I think that's what I want to focus on today is Josh Primo at 12. I want your immediate reaction from that. What did you think about the pick? And maybe elaborate why you're either not on board with it or why you are okay with it.
Okay, so I'll preface this with, originally when I first heard the name, I had a similar reaction to when my Washington football team drafted Jamin Davis in the first round. I was like, wow, okay. I'm not gonna lie, I was happy that it wasn't Şengün. That's the one guy I was like, please God, no Şengün, no. But whenever they drafted Primo, I was like, you know what? Originally I was like, wow, I probably would have went Trey Mann if you want to get a guard. If you want to get a 3-level creator, I would have went Trey Mann. But whenever I saw the name and I saw it come up, I was like, okay, that's fine. I've been talking about, I want them to swing on upside right now. I do not want someone who's, maybe a low end starter, kind of like that's their ceiling. They can play immediately. Yeah, that's fine, but they might be capped out, potential and ceiling wise. So I was cool with the approach. The execution, I definitely had questions about. Drafting a guy like him, I was like, wow. I mean, I wrote a mock draft literally yesterday, and I had him going, I think, like 33rd. Like, I just didn't, I didn't know he was picking up lottery steam. I'll add more to that. I want to hear your opinion as well, and I'll add more to that because I think we know why they picked him there, or at least I think I know why they did. But yeah, feel free to chime in, bro.
Yeah, so for sure, I'm going to go ahead and provide a little bit of context. I got some notes here. I'm going to read directly from the notes so that everybody sort of understands the background on this, because I want to give as much background as possible, right? I don't want to leave anybody in the dark. So some notes here that I have on Josh Primo. So basically, I had him 31st on my big board, right? I'm just going to be transparent with you. 31st on my big board, and I looked around the NBA, like the big draft writers like Kevin O'Connor, John Hollinger, Jonathan Givony, Sam Vecini, Mike Schmitz, Chad Ford, those guys. The highest he was on any of their big boards was 24. The lowest he was 43. So he was sort of a late first round, early second round kind of guy for most of the draft experts. And I know not everybody trusts those guys, and that's totally fine. But I think one of the things for me that is sort of indicative of what the NBA thought of him is basically what the NBA does every year, right? They gather intel on what they think teams are going to do in the first round. And then they invite about 20 to 25 players into this thing called the green room, right? So it's the room where you have all the players sitting there. They're on national television so that when their name is called, right, they walk on the stage, they shake Adam Silver's hand, they take a picture with him. And Primo wasn't invited to the green room. Like, he wasn't one of the 20 players invited, which to me sort of speaks volumes as to where the league thought he would come off the board. And so those two things are sort of interesting to me. And the last thing that I'll sort of throw out here, and we'll go more in depth on other things, but when he was picked and after he had his media availability, I'll go ahead and give you a couple of quotes from Josh Primo himself. So he said, honestly, I told my agent shut up when he told me. I had no idea. I had to believe it when I saw it on the screen first. And the second thing he said was, I don't even know if I was ready for that. I didn't think I would go that high. So I just think it's very interesting that this guy who, clearly guys are confident in themselves, right? They're coming out of college. Yeah. They know they're good basketball players. They sort of have an idea where they're getting drafted. And this dude had no idea he was going 12. Like, that is wild to me that even he didn't know that he was going 12.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about, and that's the thing is, like, I don't want to sit here and like bash on his agent, but like, I wonder if his agent had any idea, you know what I mean? Like, cause I know there could be times where, like, I've heard about it in the NFL where like their agent withholds a little bit of information from them, just like kind of like as a surprise or kind of, something like that, not so they're not too high, not too low. But I mean, yeah, no, it was definitely a shock to me. I definitely did not see this coming. Like, whenever we all talk about the Spurs, like, oh, hey, they're going to draft this guy that no one's heard about, right? Well, we all heard about Josh Primo. We heard about him. We definitely did. We just didn't hear about him at number 12. Like, I'm not going to lie, I thought like Zaire Williams, a guy that I was pretty high on. I thought man, at 12, it might be a little bit of a reach, right? I write that piece the other day. I say, hey, they can, trade back for him or something like that. Josh Primo, I had no idea. I had none. That's why I was cool. I'm cool with the approach and what they did, but the execution, I have questions about. That's why, like yesterday, when all the Spurs fans are riled up, like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I was cool with the approach 100%,
Yeah.
1,000,000%. I was definitely not someone that said, hey, they need to draft Franz Wagner, they need to draft Kispert, or even a guy like in Moses Moody, who I feel the Spurs have a couple of guys that have a very similar mold to him as far as play style goes. When they went for a Primo, or if they would have drafted Trey Mann or something like that, I would have been fine, because they have a different dynamic that currently isn't on the roster. But there was definitely better options, I felt, at 12. You know what I mean? So good approach, questionable execution. I'm not gonna say bad, because if he's a good player, I don't think it's really gonna matter. But
yeah, and we're hoping that he's like going to be a good player, right? But one of the things that I also want to touch on for a second is Brian Wright had media availability, obviously. And so basically what he said was, direct quote from him is, what intel says isn't always what mock drafts say. And I can't exactly say who said this to me, but allegedly the Knicks offered the Spurs 19 and 21 for just 12 straight up because they wanted to get into the lottery, right? And they had that on the table, and the Spurs said no, because they believed that there were teams in the teens who legitimately had serious interest in taking Primo. So they held on to 12 so that they could ensure that they got him. And I guess like that's fine if that's their guy. But for me, Primo is a guy who, not just me, but a lot of other people have said, he goes back to Alabama for a second year. He's still only going to be 19. He's still going to be one of the youngest guys in the next draft class. He's probably going lottery. Like, he'll have more responsibilities. He's able to show more. And those kind of guys, like JT Thor, Kai Jones, specifically Josh Primo, those kind of guys who you think might go in the lottery next year, those are guys you want to target, right? Because you can get really good value. But if you think they're going in the lottery next year, if they go back to college, which obviously they didn't, you don't take them at 12. Like, you can move down to 19 and 21, which is a move I would have done. I would have moved down to 19 and 21 because for me, even if he is not there, I don't think he was such a sure thing or like such a good bet to end up becoming this really outstanding player that you couldn't have taken somebody like Kai Jones would have been available there for you if you really wanted Kai Jones. JT Thor was available. Trey Mann was available. I just don't really understand the move. Now, of course, I'm going to support the kid 100%, right? Like, he's 18 years old, youngest kid in the draft. He doesn't need anybody saying like, oh, he can't do this, he can't do that. I'm going to believe in him. I'm going to try to support him as much as I can because I want to see him succeed, mostly because you don't want any players to fail, but also the Spurs took a bet on him. Like, if he doesn't succeed, it looks bad on them. So I'm 100% behind the pick at this point, even if I don't really understand the logic of them making
it. Yeah. And that's the thing too, is if they had that deal, which I believe you, like they had 19 and 21 on the table, it's definitely interesting because then I think that means if they didn't take it, they felt pretty strongly someone was going to. Someone was going to take him earlier, and maybe that was their guy. You know what I mean? Like, something similar happened again, like with Washington with selecting Jamin Davis. All throughout the draft process, I'm writing about him, and I'm like, hey, there's a third round grade on him for many people, but dude, he's getting first round consideration, like significant consideration. So maybe this is a guy, it was in the same boat. Maybe he did rise like that, and people are betting that this kid is 18 years old. Like, I just watched the Auburn game today. The kid was 18 years, 3 weeks old in that game. Like, he was literally a child. You know what I mean? So I think, there was probably significant rumors, the significant steam coming that, hey, he was going to go, earlier than expected. But I mean, man, San Antonio, that you talk about really believing in someone, you can't say that this organization doesn't believe in him. I mean, and he probably knows that for sure. Like, hey, I went a lot earlier than I expected. I hope, the pressure, hypothetically doesn't get on him because, you did go a lot earlier than you expected. You know what I mean? It would be like for me if after I got out of college, I get hired by Fox Sports 1, I'd be a little nervous. I'd be like, man, I'm real young. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, but yeah, man, it's definitely, hearing that they had 19 to 21 available was really tough, a little bit to stomach, because man, Kai Jones and Trey Mann would have been nice. You know what I mean? It would have been nice to walk away with both of those. But if this is their guy, how can I argue against them right now? Because they could have went some, worse in my opinion. Like, if you draft someone like Şengün who can play immediately, there's his flaws in his game. I feel like he won't be able to fix. I don't think he's going to ever be a good rim protector, a stout rim protector. I don't think he's going to move well enough laterally to play the 4. So I don't really know. I don't, certain players like that, it's kind of tough to, for me at least, to stomach it at 12 because you kind of know what you're getting. There's a limit there that At least with someone like Primo, yes, there's a very big, very wide gap of how good they can become. But I mean, if there's one organization that we always talk about that can get the most out of somebody, it's going to be San Antonio.
Yeah, and I've sort of got an interesting tidbit here for you as well. This is sort of the last bit of intel or whatever. This isn't from me. This is from News 4 San Antonio. They said that the Spurs allegedly loved what they saw from Primo at the Combine and in his private workout with him, but that Primo was heavily debated among the organization on draft night, and that it was ultimately the higher brass within the organization that made the decision to go with Primo over other prospects. So to me, I'm fine with them making that decision, but the fact that it sounds like there's a possibility that they weren't all on board collectively and they just went, hey, we got to take somebody, you make the decision, that worries me a little bit. Again, I think he's going to be fine, and we can sort of talk about his game in just a second, but let's talk about what it means for the timeline of the Spurs, because the dude's 18 years old. He's nearly 3 years younger than anyone else on this roster, and they took a guard. And I know we joke all the time, right? Guard. Now pretty much the only players they have under contract who are not guard are Drew Eubanks, Jakob Poeltl, Luka Šamanić. You could probably classify Keldon Johnson, Lonnie Walker, Trey Jones, Derek White, Devin Vassell, DeJounte Murray, all as guards. And let's not rule out that they're going to try to bring back Patty. I mean, Patty has been a pillar of this organization for a decade now. There's a chance they bring him back. So what to you, what does that mean for the timeline? Like, where are they going? Does that mean somebody's gone?
There's two ways I look at this. One of them worries me. Well, the one thing, and we'll elaborate more about Primo's game later, right? He can, work well as a movement shooter off the ball, something that I feel San Antonio doesn't have right now, right? That's a great thing. I hope that's not what they're looking at. And they're like, hey, he can contribute in that way. And that's solely what they focus on. Because me and you have talked about this, where sometimes Pop will play players to their strengths, sometimes to a fault. Shout out to my guy, DeMar DeRozan. That's what I think Pop did a little bit there. That's what worries me. That is what significantly worries me. But if now they're looking at, hey, we want a full reset. Shout out to your guy, Nick, right? Nick Yarbrough for the, yeah. So he mentioned that last night on the stream, like, hey, they could be resetting the timeline. I would be fine with it. I mean, personally, I would, but I think if you're going to do that, you need to make a move like right now and start, and obviously, next week you make a move as soon as possible and move some players off and completely just reset this timeline, because this kid is literally a kid. He's 18 years old. Like, I would be shocked if he played like significant minutes within the next 2 years. So I think, there's a chance they might, fully reset this. And not to start anything, but this guy does kind of fit well with Ben Simmons. You know what I mean? Like, just to throw that out there. It is kind of interesting. You know what I mean? Like, if they are going to reset it and they want a full, a new slate here, they could be doing that.
They could, and I think it's interesting. I think people sort of read too much into social media. I know a lot of people saw DeJounte Murray post on Twitter, like the sort of like awkward face emoji, and they were like, oh man, he didn't like the pick or whatever. And this morning somebody posted it, reposted it on Instagram, and he found it. Dude, he found it. He was like, no, that's not what that was. If I didn't mention a player, blah, blah, blah. And I tend to believe him. Like, he posts stuff all the time. He takes stuff down all the time. Like, he does what he does on social media. I think he might have even like a little bit of fun, like messing with people on there, because everybody wants to read into that. I don't read into it too much, but I think you look at the reports that were saying, Derek White, DeJounte Murray are gettable.
Yep.
I don't know if there's not a chance that they're not gone, because like I mentioned with the timeline, like they could be resetting it. They could be resetting the timeline. They could be moving on from certain guys. And what I think is really interesting is you look at a guy like Primo, and it's interesting to think about it this way. In 5 years, he will still be younger than Derek White was as a rookie. Like, isn't that crazy? Because I don't know how much he fits into that timeline. Like, DeJounte is not old by any means, like by any stretch of the imagination. He's only going to be 25. Derek's 27. Derek is almost a decade older than this dude. And DeJounte Murray is a full 7 years older than this guy. Like, it's insane to think. So by the time he's ready to play, those guys might be 30 in 28. Like by the time he's really ready to contribute, but we'll see. Maybe it'll speed up. You know, maybe his development will speed up. I'm not sure how much time he'll spend in Austin, but I do know, like yesterday during the presser, he said, you know, regardless if it's in San Antonio or if it's in Austin, I'm just excited to be part of the organization. I'm ready to get to work. And you like to hear that. Like if he does spend a year in Austin, which I think is probably more than likely, I'm going to be interested to see what he does there, because I think he didn't have a very high usage role at Alabama. And I think that's something we will probably see from him in Austin. And I want to see that. I want to see what he is capable of. I want to know who he is more as a prospect.
Yeah. And another thing, it's interesting that you mentioned that about possibly them being moved. I don't think it's a matter of if, but when. I mean, honestly, because look at it, when you look at it, I mean, you have guys, everyone's been clamoring for this young group to get more touches, right? But what I don't understand is, okay, they have a guard, right? They added another guard. They added, we don't know what's going to happen with Patty. You're going to have Lonnie. You're going to have DeJounte. You're going to have Derek. I mean, Devin Vassell, what is he going to be? You know, like, I believe there's shot creation upside there. He's going to need the ball in his hands to create. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, Lonnie Walker, everyone's clamoring for more, touches for him. And everyone wants, maybe Trey Jones can get some run. But my deal is, it just, when you draft someone this young, right, unless you're going to want him to be in that specific role that I mentioned earlier, just as a movement shooter off the ball, which I hope that's not what they're doing, because that would be, then it's a horrible pick. You could get something like a skill set like that in free agency or in the second round, like they did. I think it's going to be really, it's a weird, like I said, like you said, timeline wise, like an 18-year-old, when he's going to be ready at age 22, 23, these guys are going to be in their prime. I mean, I'd argue DeJounte's probably entering his prime. Right now, you're kind of, what you see is what you get is, is approaching DeJounte. And I think it's like you're already there with Derek as well. So it's, trust me, it is a weird move from that perspective as well, because you don't know when this guy can contribute. You know what I mean? Like, I think he's a season or probably two away from actually, getting some significant minutes, but we'll see, man. I mean, and what's even more interesting too is, like, look at this way. We haven't even seen Luka Samanic play like consistent NBA minutes. Like, what's going to happen there? Like maybe Luka, Keldon, Primo, and Devin Vassell are like what they want to do. Maybe that's what they think is the future, and DeJounte and Derek are the present.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Yeah, I mean, you can't rule it out necessarily, but it is strange, like the fact that Luka hasn't really played that much. We'll see. I mean, we'll see what they do with that.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you. So I asked you for your immediate reaction, but what would you grade this pick? Just be honest with me. I'll tell you what I gave it. I gave this pick a C-. I don't want to go into D territory, because as someone who I firmly believe would have been a lottery pick the following year, it's not like they went and picked Luka Garza 12, right? It's not like they picked someone like
Frank Kaminsky.
Like they didn't. It was a big reach. Like I said, like for me, he was 31 on my big board, which means they picked basically 19 picks earlier than I probably would have. But at the end of the day, like, he is 18 years old. He's shown some nice flashes, and we'll get into his game in a minute. But what was your grade for him? Like, what do you give that pick?
Oh, I would say it's probably like a C+, because I'd be a hypocrite if I gave it anything less, because I love the approach. That's what I've been saying for a while now. Like, I've been saying, yes, swing on upside, swing on, actual shot creation at all three levels. Like, I was a Josh Giddey guy, and everyone was telling me, oh, Giddey stinks. Oh, he's not a good athlete. But I was like, no, man, create, like, 3-level creation is something San Antonio needs. Like, so I'm cool with the approach, but the execution is what's questionable. So I think I can't give it anything more than a C+.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. And I know some people I saw, like, for example, I'll just go ahead and give you grades from sort of like the major networks. I don't necessarily agree with all of the grades. It's not that I think that they're like way off or anything like that, but the grades here that we got are NBC Sports give it a C+ like you did. SB Nation, my network, gave it a D. I don't want to throw them under the bus like that, right? Like, I don't think it's a D. Bleacher Report also gave it a D. Sporting News was on board with me with a C-. USA Today C+, DraftKings C, Sports Illustrated C. So I think, like, generally people are sort of on board with what we're saying. Like, when I'm reading what they said, it's a reach, but it could end up paying off.
Yeah.
And I think that's the important thing to remember, is it could end up paying off. So let's move into his game. What do you see from him? And I'll talk about it too, but I want to get your opinion on his game, what he brings to the table, maybe what he needs to work on improving if he wants to become, worthy of that 12th pick.
Yeah. So I watched the Auburn and Alabama game about 9 a.m. this morning, and I'll stick out, offensively immediately. This dude has legit NBA range. He's a great shooter, I feel. Even though, I mean, the percentage isn't like, oh my God, he was 50, 50, 90 or anything like that. But off the catch, no, there's definitely NBA level range, NBA level shooting. Like, he's going to be a really good shooter, I feel. I think off the catch, off the ball, it's gonna work. As far as his game off the dribble, he can actually get to the rim relatively well, I would say, even though he's not this amazing quick first step, going to give you a couple of crosses and a hezzy and go or anything like that. But despite not being a dynamic ball handler, he can actually get to the rim really well. What he does at the rim needs a lot of work. I mean, like, respectfully, there was times where he's going up to the rim very soft and he's getting a shot pinned into the glass, pinned into the stands. I believe in the Auburn game, he had a shot blocked 4 times from what I saw, which that's pretty alarming. You know what I mean? Like, there was one time where he pushes off with his left hand and Shreve Cooper, tries to, draw the foul. And Primo's going, he's driving. He does a Euro. The big shadows him the entire time and just literally just puts his hand up, swats him. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, he needs some work there, both as a scorer and as a facilitator there when he's going to the rim, because he's missing guys that are wide open as well. So, I mean, you can see the potential there, the upside there. Offensively, maybe, this guy, you can turn into being a 3-level creator. Like, there's definitely potential there. I believe, even as a pull-up 3-point shooter, something that the Spurs need as well. There's definitely a lot of potential there as well. So stuff like that is what you're working with, but he is very far from a finished product offensively. Defensively, in the Auburn and Alabama game, he didn't do a lot on the ball. He wasn't very active, just wasn't needed. But off the ball as a team defender, he did some good stuff, drew a charge. There was one where he's going to protect the rim. He goes, stays vertical, doesn't foul, leads into a turnover. That's good stuff, right? He's an 18-year-old kid. You're not going to be upset at that whatsoever. I'm still going to watch a couple more games just to kind of get a better feel. But I think what sticks out immediately is the shooting, the actual creation upside off the dribble, pull-up shooting, pick and roll stuff. And I think that's something San Antonio really needs, so I can see why they reached there. But trust me, guys, there's a long way to go.
There certainly is a long way to go, but I want to go back to the shooting. So specifically, he shot 38.1% on 3.8 3-point attempts per game. And I really like that. Like, that's a solid foundation. And like you mentioned with catch and shoot, he shot 44.4% off catch and shoot opportunities this season as a freshman. And to me, the thing that's really encouraging about that is you look at his shot prep, it's immaculate, right? His hands are always ready. He's in shooting position, his body squared to the basket. And the second that ball's hitting his hands, he's stepping into that shot. Those are all things that you don't necessarily expect out of an 18-year-old. So I do think potentially if he does play for San Antonio this season, the shooting to me translates immediately. Like, I don't think he's going to have a problem with that. And like you mentioned as well, the movement shooting is encouraging. He moves well off ball. He's a good cutter. He's good at relocating. He's good at also one of the things that I saw when I was watching him play, because I saw a few of his games this season. I'm not going to say I watched every game, but I watched about 3 or 4 games of his this season. Is he drives and he'll kick and then he'll immediately relocate. And then he's ready right off of that relocation to shoot the ball. And then he showed some flashes of being able to shoot running off screens, which those are all things you really like. And the last thing that you mentioned was off the dribble. The dude can shoot off the dribble. He absolutely can. Now, was it a large sample size? Was it a great percentage? No, but he showed legitimate NBA range. He was comfortable letting it fly. And those are things that you have to be encouraged with in terms of him. Now, I'm not going to say that he's a good driver, right? He was able to get to the rim fairly well, but he doesn't have a very good first step. And one of the things that really caught my eye when I'm watching him is he's a crafty finisher, right? Like, he likes the up and unders. He likes to throw a ball fake. But one of the things he really likes to do is bring that ball up right from the hip. And he did that a lot, and he got his shot blocked a ton because those defenders, they're waiting for that, right? He's mostly right-handed. He almost exclusively finished with the right hand. He was always trying to get back to his right hand. They're looking at him the whole time. They're reading it off the hip. They swat it before it even gets above his shoulder.
Yep.
And those are things he's going to have to finish because he is so long, right? He is 6'5" with a 6'9". Somebody also reported that he's now 6'6" with a 6'11". So if that's true, incredibly long wingspan. That's outlier wingspan for somebody his height. He can't be doing that. Now, he can do it occasionally, but that can't be his go-to every time. Like, you look at guys who do that, Ricky Rubio's doing that. There's a reason Ricky Rubio's doing that, because he is so small. I think he's sort of negating his length there. But there are other areas like he has, I think his dribble package isn't super advanced, but he did string together some good moves here and there. He was able to shake guys, but the burst, not being able to get by smaller players because he's not strong enough, he's not fast enough. And then the last thing that sort of worries me is he didn't really like take advantage of mismatches against bigs. The only way that he did so was when he was shooting, when he was able to size them up, shoot off the dribble. But trying to blow by bigs, it just didn't work. And I don't know if that's because, one, his burst isn't too good, or two, maybe he's just not very strong, or maybe it's a combination of both. But at 18 years old, I don't think he's a finished product. I think he can continue it, growing as an athlete and maybe even growing as a player. Now, let me ask you, if he grows a few inches, and so he goes from, 6'5", 6'6" to 6'7", 6'8", and he has this sort of guard skill set, that makes him immeasurably more valuable. What do you think that would mean for him? Like, as a playmaker, as a shooter, as a scorer, what could that mean if he grows a little bit? Because I think that's a possibility. He is only 18.
Yeah. Well, the thing for me is the size there. I think what I'm more concerned with, of course, like we've been talking about, is the strength. Now, if he turns 6'8", 6'7", that's fine, but he needs to learn how to actually play with that, play with that to his actual strength. Like you mentioned with the little scoop layup off the hip, SGA does that as well. I don't know if that's just a Canadian guard thing or something like that, but yes, they do that all the time. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like just lay the ball up. But yeah, no, I mean, if he actually added more size, that would be really impressive. I mean, yeah, I mean, athletic profile wise, he's going to be in the 99th percentile. Like, it would be insane for his position. But yeah, I think adding size, mostly just adding strength, I think that's the biggest thing he needs to really work on. And even if he's not able to take advantage of those bigs off the dribble like that, one thing I would say is he needs to learn, if he's not going to be able to do that, he needs to learn how to master actually playing with pace. Like something SGA or D'Angelo Russell does is they're really good at playing with pace, although they're not, super quick off the dribble. Now, they have good dribble packages and stuff like that. But if he can master how to play with pace, I'd be fine with it. I'd be cool if he's not, giving me Trae Young, hey, hezzy, and gone. You know what I mean? Like, it'd be fine. But I think that's kind of my biggest concern, my biggest worry is if he needs to learn that. But man, if you're looking at a 6'8" guard at with a 6'11" wingspan that can give you that creation, man, I mean that only makes the pick sound better. You know what I mean? So
yeah, for sure. And let me ask you this too. So we're talking about his self-creation. I want to make that clear. So when it comes to him creating for other teammates, I think that's a little bit of a concern for me, right? He had 41 turnovers, I believe, to 25 assists. And not all of that was off of like passes, although he did tend to telegraph passes. He would stare down his targets. Then he would try to fit it into too small of a window. And at that point, any average defender is going to be picking off that pass, right? But he also sort of had tunnel vision. He got a little carried away, played out of control on drives, committed quite a few charges. Is that something that projects well? Because one of the things that the Spurs said that they liked from him was they saw things that they did not see previously in college at the combine. And I watched those combine games. I didn't really feel like he played much better than he did at Alabama. So I don't know what they saw. Maybe they also saw it in the workout or something, but is that a skill that you think is projectable for him? Because at this point, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing the playmaking for others upside.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something you got to worry about. I know I also read that tweet as well. Someone tweeted that was at the combine and said like, hey, Primo flashed, playmaking ability that we didn't see. You know what I mean? So maybe in the workout or something like that, they saw that as well. I know I did read that, hey, he didn't have a lot of, time opportunities as like a primary ball handler. I'm reading it right here that he only found himself in the pick and roll 10% of his touches. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I think there's definitely something to look at. There's something that intrigues you there. But I definitely can't say he's not going to give you D'Angelo Russell 3-level creation right now. I can't say that for a fact. You know what I mean? There's not really a solid foundation here for that. But I mean, like I said, there's so much if involved here, right? Like if he does, because if he can do that, I mean, like I said, that's a skill set that is not on this team at all. I mean, I really feel that way. So yeah, I think I'm definitely on your side when it comes to like, yeah, we haven't really seen it because we really haven't. But I mean, he's just so young. I mean, you're working with a clean canvas here. You can definitely sculpt something out and make something out of what he brings right now.
Definitely. And I'm excited for him. Like, I don't want to trash all over him. I do think he has the potential to be a really, really good player down the line. But like you said, it's the ifs. If he's able to add, X, Y, Z to his game, if he's able to, it is a lot of ifs. But like you mentioned, if we know an organization that has consistently been able to get the most out of whoever they draft, It has been the San Antonio Spurs. I mean, they have been good time and time again. And so for me, the last thing that I sort of want to pick your brain about is, do you think he should be playing in the NBA from day one? Because to me, if you're taking a guy at 12, I think you should. You look at the organization like the Oklahoma City Thunder, like they threw Alexei Pokashevsky, Shea Alexander, Lou Dort, Darius Baisley, you name it. Like any guy who they drafted or acquired who was young, they were getting minutes immediately. And I think there's some advantage to playing with sort of a loose leash, right? Like it's not that they're not being held accountable, but they're not being yanked out of games for every mistake. They're being told, hey, like we understand that you're making mistakes. We're going to call you out when you do make the mistakes, but we're going to let you learn on the fly. Now, I think that would be a great way to approach Josh Primo because I think there's only so much value to the G League. And I mentioned it on the stream last night, right? If you're a team like the Spurs, they were winning for years and years and years. You got Tim Duncan, you got Manu, you got Pop, you got Tony, you got Bruce Bowen. You're in the prime of the dynasty. You can't afford to be having guys learn on the fly, right? Like you're trying to win right now. That's why you saw guys like DeJounte, Bryn Forbes, even guys like Corey Joseph, Kyle Anderson, Jan Mahimni. Like those guys are spending time in the G League because they could not afford to be losing games because you're in a championship window. The Spurs aren't in a championship window right now. Like to me, that means you got to get this guy minutes, or if he is in the G League, he's got to be the number one option, number two option, unless, you know, Luka's still there. And he's got to be playing heavy minutes every single night. So I want to get your take on that because I'm pretty firm in what I believe, but I'd love for you to change my mind if you have a different opinion.
No. The only reason why I want him in the G League is to be the primary ball handler and get those reps. That is literally it. That is my only reason why I want him in the G League, because I want the ball in his hands and I want him to basically learn the game. I mean, he's an 18-year-old kid. That's what I want. As far as Luka Samanic, like all respect to him, I don't think he offers any shot creation like that. So I don't really want Luka Samanic dribbling the air out of the ball. Give Primo all of those touches. But no, seriously, I think the only reason why I'd want him in Austin is because of that, because I want him to learn, you know, basically get those reps as the primary ball handler. Like we mentioned too, the Spurs run so much pick and roll as well. They were the fourth highest team running pick and roll this past year. Primo only ran pick and roll 10% of the time at Alabama. I mean, unless you're going to throw him out there, which I'd be cool with it if he was playing 60, 70 games with the Spurs. I mean, we'd all be fine with it. But unless you want to, you know, throw him out there like that, man, let him learn in Austin. Might as well. I mean, like you mentioned, the Spurs aren't competing. They you know, respectfully, they'd be lucky if they competed for the playoffs. Like, you know, all due respect. So, I mean, why not? And what are you going to lose? You know what I mean? What do you have to lose right now? So, yeah, I think the only reason why I'd want him in the G League is to get those primary reps. But outside of that, let him play in San Antonio. I mean, he can contribute. There's definitely a way he can contribute. I mean, the shooting's no joke. He can contribute in that way immediately. Just my only worry is that's all they let him do. That's all they want him to do. That's where I'm kind of like, nah, let's not do that.
Yeah, and I guess like to sort of like quell your concerns, I have one last thing that like Brian Wright and them said is they said we're really excited about what we were able to do tonight. We went into the draft improving what we thought was best player available, best potential long-term ceiling, versatility in shooting, and that the league has become increasingly positionless. I don't believe in 1 to 5 labels, and we have continuously targeted long athletic perimeter players. So to me, when I hear that, I don't think that they just drafted him for shooting. I know that they wanted to address shooting, and I think they did a little bit with Joe Wieskamp. And we won't talk about Joe Wieskamp. We'll just stick to Josh Primo today. But for me, that sort of signals that they believe in this guy. Like long-term, they believe in his future. They believe that he's going to have potential to be a really good player, not just another asset. And I'm not saying that everybody on the roster is just an asset, but there are certainly players to me who their scalability in a new role in terms of being a first option, a second option, that just isn't there. It just isn't there for a winning team. Sure, you can give DeJounte and Derek and Keldon and Lonnie and Devin and Luka a bunch of touches, a bunch of shots. I'm not really 100% convinced that all those guys are going to be effective in a new role. And I sincerely think that it could be a rude awakening. And I've said it before on the podcast, but a rude awakening for Spurs fans who were saying, you know, just get them touches. And I'm all for that, right? Get them touches, get them shots, let them run the show so you know what you have in them. But I think at the end of the day, you may not like what you find out. And hopefully they prove me wrong. But a lot of the things that they got to get better at, like Keldon, not a good standstill shooter. not good at creating for himself. DeJounte, not a good standstill shooter, not a good shooter off the dribble out to the 3-point range, not an excellent facilitator. Derek White doesn't stay healthy. I love his game, but he just doesn't stay healthy. Devin Vassell sort of projects as a low usage guy. He showed some self-creation potential. I still believe in that to a certain extent, but I think he's closer to a Mikal Bridges. Like, none of that screams future superstar or, perennial all-star, the bona fide second best player on your team to me. And for that reason, I think that there's a good chance with this Primo pick, they're looking at the long game. Like, next year, there is an incredibly good draft class at the very top. You've got Chet Holmgren, you've got Paolo Banchero. You land either one of those guys with the core that they have. Maybe you sign a John Collins. Let's say they sign a John Collins in free agency. You could be looking at a really good team. But first, for them to be able to do that, they've got to lose. And personally, I think I'm okay with that. As long as they're getting all the young guys touches, they figure out what they got, they have a definitive plan, I'm fine with that. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, and to piggyback off the John Collins thing, I think what I mentioned earlier about them competing for a playoff spot, I think how this roster is currently constructed, I'd be shocked if they were competing for a playoff spot, just kind of where we are right now. But, as piggybacking off of that, yeah, no, I think they're definitely playing the long game. And I put that on Twitter, like, when I heard Brian Wright, he said that, didn't he? Like, we're playing the long game, or he said something similar to that, like with the timeline. I agree, because Primo definitely needs a lot of work, right? He's going to need some time to develop. But I think through and through where this team's headed at, they have, like we've mentioned, like me and you've talked about, they have so many complementary pieces. Like, that's what they have right now. That's where I think everyone is going to be best at. They don't have that guy who really just transcends what they do, that offers something different. It's kind of like everyone does a little bit of the same thing. No, they have some floor raisers, but no one who really raises the ceiling of the team. So that's why, like, when you pick a guy like a Primo, or you're adding other guys, like, that's why I'm all for this approach and what they did and who they're looking to add, what skill sets they're looking to add, because 3-level creation is important in today's league, man. I mean, we can talk about how shooting's overrated and this and that, which is a whole nother deal, which I think context matters with that, with a statement like that, because San Antonio is definitely not overrated. But they're looking at where the game's going. In a sense, this kind of makes me happy that they're going this way, because I think they're starting to realize, like, hey, we need something different now. Like, what we're doing now is not working. We need something entirely different. But yeah, man, just to kind of couple all that together, I think where San Antonio's headed, and this draft kind of really, they're looking, 4, 5, 6 years from now, and I think, like I mentioned earlier, Derek and DeJounte might be the present, but I don't know if they'll be the future. You know what I mean? I think the future is really gonna revolve around, a Primo, a Devin, a Keldon, next year whoever they select. Hey, maybe John Collins can be in that too, maybe. But I mean, right now where they're headed at, I think we're kind of entering like a true, like, new era of Spurs basketball.
Yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible, and I don't want to be a pessimist. I always just try to be a realist. Like, when I talk about the Spurs, I'm never trying to just, dump on the organization. I just want to be honest. When you look at this division, Southwest Division, the Rockets now have Kevin Porter Jr., they've got Jalen Green, they got Christian Wood. They were able to pick up Usman Garuba and Alperen Şengün in the draft at, I think, appropriate draft spots. You've also got the Mavericks. They've got Luka, they've got KP, Tyrell Terry, and Josh Green that are solid assets that I don't really think got to prove themselves. You look at Memphis, they got Ja Morant, they got Triple J. You've got Brandon Ingram, you've got Zion Williamson for the Pelicans. And I think the Spurs, even though I think they have one of the better young cores in the league, they have the worst young core overall, just from a talent perspective in the division. And you lose more games next year, you add a Paolo Banchero, you add a Chet Holmgren, you're looking at potentially one of the best young cores
exactly
in the division, if not in the NBA. So I'm excited to see what they do. Really, if they win, if they prove me wrong and they end up making the playoffs and make a run, good. I'm glad. That means they're ahead of the timeline. They've also got a young asset in Josh Primo. But if they lose, they still got a ton of really valuable assets on tradable contracts. They've got some young players in the works in Keldon and Devin Vassell and Josh Primo. They have a lot of options. So I don't think the Spurs are, necessarily stuck in the mud or is in a bad of a position as some fans or some media members might want to make it out to be. But overall, I appreciate you joining me on this podcast. Let everyone know where they can find you on social media, where they can find your writing. If you have anything in the works, let those people know.
Yeah, go ahead and follow me on Twitter, y'all. It's at DA Bartonek. That's at DABARTONEK. Check out my pin tweet. You can see where I cover the Spurs. I cover the Washington football team and kind of just the NFL in general. I cover Texas State sports as well. I have my own podcast where primarily we talk about the Washington football team, but I'm definitely working on getting some crossover episodes done here soon. Yeah, and I'm a full-time student at Texas State, so just follow the ride. You know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to make it on ESPN, Fox Sports 1, something like that, something like. But yeah, thank you, Noah, for having me, brother. I appreciate it. You're legitimately like my GOAT. So yeah, this is dope.
No, I appreciate you joining me, man. And I fully believe in you. You got the talent, you got the drive, you're putting out great stuff. So everybody check out what he's doing. But thanks again for joining me. And thanks to everyone who tuned in for this edition of Alamo City Limits. And for those of you listening at home, make sure to subscribe, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And we've got a fantastic staff of writers over at Pounding the Rock who do an amazing job of keeping everyone up to date with their favorite teams. So check our stuff out. But until next time, Spurs fans, take care.